Beautiful day here in Lytham in Lancashire, and here with Andy Rhodes, former Chief Constable of Lancashire. And
right.
Andy, well, you're going to take us along a walk down the not quite the back streets, but the certainly a back walk around Lytham, through the woodland, and then potentially onto the coast itself. Though we'll see how we do with that. Might be the occasional bit of traffic that passes us by, but we can deal with that, I'm sure. Former Chief Constable of Lancashire, Andy, and born and bred in Lancashire, lad, and yet making quite an impact on policing nationally through the Oscar Kilo programme. Many of those in England, Wales, indeed British Isles, will be familiar with Oscar Kilo, but particularly for our international audience, tell us a bit more about that. What's Oscar Kilo?
Well, it's been a interesting journey, 7 or 8 years ago. Ian Hesketh, who's now Dr. Ian Hesketh, did a PhD on this thing called wellbeing in policing. Language we'd never even spoken about before. Obviously that incorporates a huge range of factors, and I think the journey that we've got to over the years that's ended up with Oscar Kilo, which is it's a what works centre, evidence-based support for forces. We do research, but we've also got a fleet of 10 vehicles that go out doing a range of things. We deliver training, and we've got a really good brand, and the brand was always meant to be separate from the other brands in policing, because we know confidence to talk about things like mental health. People aren't always comfortable to do it to their employer, to other big organisations. So we're now fully funded through the College of Policing, got a fantastic team of experts in all sorts of different fields, whether it be clinical, whether it be around organisational wellbeing. And recently, like this week, big landmark for us, because a lot of our work is included within the police covenant that's been announced this week by the Home Secretary, which effectively enshrines wellbeing in law. Which means it's not a flash in the pan, which I think is fantastic news.
So say more about the policing covenant then, because it is something that those in the UK might be familiar with, but we're going to hear a great deal more about, and it is going to have an impact, and it ties in with police wellbeing, so the Oscar Kilo side of things. So policing covenant, what's that about?
The armed forces have had a covenant for many years. So the idea, the concept is that it's important to people who put their lives and their minds actually in policing, particularly on the line for the public, because the vast majority of people working in policing are very much motivated by public service ethos. It's important for them to feel valued by society, and sometimes in the police that doesn't always feel the case. You're there, there's a lot of criticism when things don't go well, etc. The covenant is more than just words. What's inside the covenant are a range of things that originate from people like the Police Federation raising issues, some tragic events where we've lost officers in the line of duty, and also the research, particularly the surveys and the employee voice, frontline review, a lot of the stuff that was done around the officer and staff safety review. So we've got around the organisation, the front line, officers and staff saying, what do you care about? And it's all about physical protection and wellbeing.
So why is it going to have an impact then? Is it to be enshrined in law, or chief constables and others are going to have to do something differently, are they? Is that why it's going to be having an impact?
Yeah, it's part of the new bill, the Police Sentencing and Crime Bill, Courts Bill. And the Home Secretary will report to Parliament on the covenant every year. When you look at the priority list for the covenant that we discussed the other day, there are things in there like the Operation Hampshire Assaults Support Programme. That needs to be just business as usual. It isn't yet. Occupational health standards, something I'm passionate about. That there is a lot of work to do to get us to where we need to be in policing, so that we've got the right provision there for people when they do come forward and say that they need some support around the mental health. So you know, these things are these are actual tangible things that the Covenant will give recognition to. It's enduring, so it's not going to be, oh, you know, this was this year's new garlic bread and then next year we're not going to do anything about it. And I think for me it really does put us on a footing in terms of something I'm passionate about, which is supporting people who do a really difficult job. It puts it on a formal footing, so, and that will register with chiefs, police and crime commissioners, everybody, you know, all of whom are committed to doing more for their people.
So what, as a chief constable, what as a police and crime commissioner, will the policing covenant make or encourage me to do differently, and then how will it benefit the police constable, the PCSO, the member of police staff working in the force?
Okay, so from the minute you join, through your service, to retirement and actually beyond, there are actions within the Covenant that are proven to improve the welfare of the people who work in your organisation. So there's nothing in there that's like come left field, that's just a daft idea. There's a lot of research gone into what's in there, and most forces are already aware of these issues. So what it'll mean for the Chief Constable, Police and Crime Commissioner, you know, support from a lot of the charities that work around policing is, it'll give a real focus to actually making sure the priority areas get attention. Because one of the things I find with wellbeing, Bernard, is that it's such a big issue that sometimes people don't know where to start. Sometimes they spend money on things that really aren't going to make that much difference, but it's not that it's not the right thing to do, it's just it's not actually the priority area. So what we're focusing on in the Covenant is getting the foundation stuff right, the stuff that really matters. You know, if you've been assaulted in the line of duty, you should get proper support from your organisation. That includes support through the criminal justice system to making sure that the offender gets the right sanction at the end of it. If, you know, we're saying to you, talk to us about your mental health, of course you're going to get stressed in this job, of course you're going to get depressed from time to time. It's tough work. When you put your hand up, we need to have the right services there for you. Otherwise people are going to say, what was the point putting my hand up? Do you see what I mean? So it's about delivering on the deal, to me, around wellbeing.
And so,
you know, and there's not all wellbeing that's in the Covenant, but there's a big chunk of it.
And so this to be enshrined in law here in England and Wales. The provisions may or may not apply to Scotland, Northern Ireland as well.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that Police Scotland, Police Service Northern Ireland will be mindful and observe, keep a keen interest.
Yes, they actually did make an amendment to the bill to cover some non-home office organisations, BTP, NCA,
National
CMC,
Crime Agency,
yes,
British Transport Police.
British Transport Police, Civil Nuclear Constabulary. So they did, after that was raised actually by the staff associations, make an amendment to the bill, and that was discussed.
Okay,
yesterday.
and so one assumes that, you know, with 43 plus forces, more than that, probably 50 plus forces and organisations here across the United Kingdom, that there will be some police forces and organisations that are doing pretty well at the moment and could do better, no doubt, and those that are doing less well. So how will that relative performance on the policing covenant be assessed?
Well, there will be a range of different governance groups set up, a delivery group. Every area that's on there will have an owner, and they'll need to report on progress. I'll give you an example. Occupational Health Standards. The National Wellbeing Service have got a team of clinical experts who are supporting forces in benchmarking where they are against that standard. They're providing them with a gap analysis, and then it's down to the force to actually review and improve and meet the needs of the service. Now, what we're finding is it's not always about more money. It could be that actually you just haven't looked at this part of the business for a long time. The people in there are beavering away, doing a good job, but there are things that need to be changed in terms of how it's set up. So certainly in Lancashire that was the case for me. It wasn't always about spending more money. It was about, and it's another thing I think we really need to stress, be in my bonnet, this one, Bernard, is that quite often people think, oh, you're stressed, so you need to see a counsellor. Now, I'm married to a psychotherapist, and it might be bad for business, but you're not going to counsel your way out of this problem. Quite often what people want is organisational issues to be fixed that are stressful. They want a good line manager that's going to be approachable and well informed. They want the bosses to walk the talk. They want workload to be right, resources to be right. Do you know what I mean? So the evidence base about what drives great organisational well-being is just run a really good bloody business. It isn't necessarily about psychological therapies, all of it. That's the top end of the pyramid.
So it's doing things, inverted commas, right in the first place in a way that delivers the business benefits, if I can describe them as that, as needed, but also recognising the link to welfare in that.
You know, some of the big organisations that I sit around the table with, global organisations, private sector, they're focusing on well-being because they attract the right people, they retain them. So turnover of staff is a big bottom line issue for them, and they want to attract talent. Now, they're interested for that reason, so are we. But their staff aren't generally experienced the high levels of trauma and stress that our people are. So what I say to senior leaders is, you've got to do what these world-class organisations are doing, but tune it up even more. Because the nature of the work is, double the levels of work-related stress of the general working population. Hundreds of traumatic experiences in a career. And therefore you've got to recognise that your workforce is going to need you to really dial up your efforts, even benchmarked against some of these world-class organisations.
And so the covenant is something that has worked within the armed forces here within the UK. But although I can see that it is in so many ways the right thing to do, isn't it going to cost more money in order to implement it? And policing is pretty strapped for cash already.
Well, you see, when you look at, for example, when I've talked about occupational health, and I will mention this because that's the one people say, that's going to cost me a lot of money. We know, and the evidence proves it, that actually if you can get people to talk about things that are bothering them early, raise their awareness of it's okay to do that, then what you're going to find is that your interventions, as we call them, are going to be far cheaper. In fact, actually, they're going to be free. Because that intervention might be speaking to a peer. You and I work on a team together. You've been trained as a peer supporter. I know that. I'm struggling with something. I just sit down with you and say, I'm struggling with this. Can I have a chat with you? And so that doesn't cost you anything. And I reflect on this when just before I left Lancashire, crossover here, spoke to one of my detective inspectors, and he said, one of the things he said to me was, the culture started to shift. So as a detective inspector, they see a lot of stuff because they're first at scene. So I go over to Blackpool, and what we do now is there'll be 3 or 4 of us, and we'll all get a cup of tea together and say, how are you feeling? No one's ever said, it's never been comfortable sitting around with your peers going, how are you feeling? And we chat about a few things, have a cup of tea, and that's all I need. You see what I mean? That doesn't cost you any money.
Okay, I'm going to put my cynical hat on for the moment here. This touchy-feely stuff. and again the cynic in me, you know, it's not necessarily going to appeal to every chief constable. It's not necessarily going to appeal to every police and crime commissioner. And you know, they are in the main the people who've got the levers.
So what I talk to them about is, and I appreciate that for some audiences you need to have a different narrative. Let me frame it this way then, to somebody who thinks we should still just be toughing it up and keeping the lid on the box. The vast majority of people who cost you a lot of money in your workforce are people who haven't had their psychological needs met. That's you know, these people can become very difficult in your organisation in a lot of senses. You spend a lot of time on very few people who become disengaged because they haven't had honest conversations. So for people who say to me well-being's pink and fluffy, I say, if it's so pink and fluffy, why is it we're all so reticent at having a difficult conversation with somebody? Because what happens is, Bernie, you don't have a conversation about the mental health. You say your performance has dropped, Bernie, without finding out that that person at work has just found out that the kid's been diagnosed with leukemia. Maybe you should have asked them that before you asked them about the performance. Do you see what I mean? Because people have got very complicated lives full of lots of things going on. It might well be that person's performance is just poor and it needs to be challenged. And that is legitimate, but what we've got to do is equip people with the skills to understand that it's okay to talk about other things that are going on in your life that may be affecting your performance at work, rather than just putting them straight into the performance process.
That discussion, that line of reasoning and logic draws me towards another area of policing, which is what has been described elsewhere as defund the police, and the reason I'm drawn to that is the kernel of the core of the good idea, if I can put it that way, of defund the police is not the taking money away from policing,
yes,
but rather it is the potential for investing effort upstream amongst those who are, dare I say, more vulnerable,
yes,
to getting involved in criminal activity. And the reason I'm drawn to that is that it's looking at in not dissimilar a way to Oscar Kilo, to the Policing Covenant. It's looking at the whole of the individual, just rather than just one, yes, particular aspect of their behaviour or their current circumstances. We're, yeah, crossing over here then, are we? So we've just had something of a busy road to cross. So your view of defund the police?
Okay, well, I think it's a false dichotomy, personally. However, as you're alluding to, the truth of the matter is that the vast majority of policing resource and funding goes into reacting to what's happening in front of them rather than preventing. And so the notion that actually we should be putting more effort, time and resource into prevention and early intervention particularly is well made, in my view. However, if you look at that through the lens of taking money from one organisation that's run off its feet to commissioning work with others, what you'll end up with is the system collapsing. Now, that's simply because if you do not meet your emergency calls for service and the reactive stuff, all you're going to do there is have more people escalating into crisis. You're going to get more serious incidents and you're going to get a complete imbalance in the system. What I advocate is, you know, there is a lot of non-value work that the police do that's creating that reactive pressure. Strip it out, create the space, fill it with prevention.
So strip it out. Non-reactive work. That sounds. So there's
non-value work.
Non-value work. So where is this non-value work, and how do you find it, and how do you strip it out?
Well, there are so many crimes recorded that never actually end up in an arrest and a court process and a sanction, isn't there? You know, you know, if you spend too much time working through those crimes, when at the outset you know it's not going to go anywhere, it's non-value work.
Well, the victim might argue that they want their crime investigated. Of
course, and there are really good models emerging where people are using, people are using algorithms to look at what is actually ever going to have a chance of an outcome, and they're closing those down, and they'll be dead honest with the victim, say, listen, this is not ever going to result in a court process. We'll do whatever we can to support you as a victim of crime, and we'll be honest with you from the outset. The worst thing you can do to a victim is lead them on thinking that they're going to get an outcome when they're not. So I think that, you know, there is a huge amount of work to do to manage this huge volume of demand that hits the police, that creates non-value work in the system and creates this reactive environment that people are working in. And what I'd like to see is that space being filled with that early intervention, preventative effort. So rebalance the equation.
One of the areas that may be relevant here that we touched on before we started this recording was in 101. 101 here in the UK is a phone line whereby you can contact the police. You dial 101. You then have the opportunity to liaise, to talk to typically a member of police staff about the matter that's concerning you. It's not an emergency, not 999, so it's not immediate response or similar. It's wider matters. Now, so you were telling me about the sort of the 101 experience, where my instinct is, from what you told me, that that's an area potentially of subject to managing it sensibly with the not necessarily the victim, but rather the member of the public contacting the force. But there's a lot of what might be termed, a bit in the jargon, but nugatory work in there.
Yes, yeah. So out of all those calls, and actually you can include in this 999 emergency calls, because you know, analysis of 999 calls will show that 80% aren't actually emergencies. Sometimes it's people who can't get through on 101, you know, telling you a job isn't an emergency when it isn't. So what you get to is there is a huge amount of calls for service, information coming into the police that is not urgent, and when you analyse it, and we have only just started using things like voice analytics, which the commercial sector have been using for decades, to translate voice information into text, so we can analyse what is, in most forces, over 50% of their calls.
So otherwise, without this voice analytics, you've just got a whole bunch of recorded voice.
You don't even know what it is unless you actually listen to the calls, which takes ages. What we find when we look at that is that it's packed with non-value work. It's people repeatedly calling what an update for the crime. It's failure demand. And that is over 50% of the calls coming in through 101. So what we're looking at is commissioning a service that moves all that onto digital, like you would get with any other organisation. You know, you try, you know, this isn't urgent, so you try getting hold of any big organisation nowadays and speaking to a human, unless you really need to do. As long as those digital services are really good and they work for you, you're quite happy, aren't you? And that's where the police service is looking to head next with 101. You know, moving that sort of give me an update, FAQs, bots and stuff that give you the information you need, rather than a human answering the call.
And so how do you get there? Because that's, you know, policing is typically pretty darn good at operational
stuff.
It is. It's forgive the the generalisation here, but it's not necessarily as good at rejigging those processes. And
well, I think this is how I think about it. And there's two ends of the spectrum. There are some forces, I know Hampshire have pushed this for a long time, the 100 Little Things campaign. So, you know, speaking to people who are in the work, saying, what are the little things that are looking at that we can just fix? And that works at a very tactical office parade room level. Get your staff saying, look, if only the printer was fixed, or if only, you know, we had an extra car here or something like that. The niggly stuff, because that can drive people nuts. Then right at the strategic end, we look at recommissioning 101, which is now being talked about, so that we're commissioning a service that is got an ability to move that demand into a purely digital service. We're still always going to have someone who needs to pick the phone up when you've got a burger in your kitchen or there's something nasty happening. But the risk with this, Bernard, is that if we don't move the non-urgent demand into digital, it'll overwhelm the emergency line. Are you with me?
Absolutely.
There's only so much money to go around.
So
that's
work,
what we've got to protect.
Yeah, work to be done there. I'm just going to pause for a moment from our policing oriented discussions just to spin the camera around. And so we've moved away from the woodland footpath and then the suburban pavement to here. I'm guessing we're sort of north, maybe northwest of Lytham, and if we were to go that way,
Famous Lytham windmill.
the Lytham windmill, which I can't zoom on this camera, don't have the technical expertise to. But
this is the Rebel Estuary that goes out into the Irish Sea. That is Southport in Merseyside over there, which is far nearer to, if you wanted to walk across it, than it is to drive. And out into the Irish Sea there, you can actually see in the distance some of the gas rigs, which
yes,
you'll see lit up.
Just there'll be a dot on the horizon on the video.
So
but
this is obviously tidal at the moment. The tide's out, you know, you've got, this is the coastline all the way up to, you know, Fleetwood on the north coast here, until the next time this coastline ends. It goes right past Blackpool.
And a beautiful day, beautiful day. We'll just walk a little bit further towards the towards the windmill, the Lytham windmill, and just as is a tradition now on these policing friendship tour walks, actually just before I move on to that, I just want to thank you personally, Andy, for a very tough year for me last year. You were an absolute rock, and I really do appreciate that. Not something remotely in, dare I say, your job description, but I do completely appreciate that. One of the elements of these walks is I do ask those that I'm walking with to nominate a charity close to their heart. Doesn't necessarily have to be policing related, but it can be. So I don't happen to know what your charity is going to be, but what is it?
Well, the Trinity Hospice in Blackpool is a cancer hospice, as you would know, like there are many around the country, and it's been a place where, you know, I've got an affinity with it. So many relatives and people I've known have gone there, including my father, for his last few days. And you know, my experience of places like the Trinity are the staff, the environment, you know, compared to what support my father was getting in general sort of health settings, was just on another level. And at that time, for the family and for him, it gave him the dignity he deserved. So I'd always pick the Trinity Hospice at Blackpool.
It sounds a fantastic charity, and they provided your father with the support and so many, several if not many relatives and potentially friends as well.
My mum still volunteers for them. So,
well, a little later on today, I'm hoping to head up towards Blackpool, which will be beyond the Lytham windmill, which is now just that little bit closer. Andy, thank you so much for your company on this walk and for your comments there, and for the nomination of that well-deserving charity. Just scanning again the horizon. This is again a beautiful day. On this walk of mine, there's been both beautiful days and some less attractive days, but this is definitely in the beautiful day category, and some sights to be seen as I and potentially we head a little further up the coast. But Andy, thank you so much for your company. Really,
it's been a pleasure to share a coffee with you and have a chat, Bernard. Good luck with the rest of the tour.
Thank you so much.